Shinza also points to the Noah story, the idea that wine was the first act of civilization after the flood. In a way, this mirrors how wine keeps rebounding after crisis. Think about the phylloxera of the 19th century, climate challenges, or even today, challenges of tariffs around the world. Each time we respond with innovation and rediscovery.
Welcome to a special series on the Italian Wine Podcast. In this series, Italian wine ambassador Ryan Robinson reads and reflects on the art of wine storytelling, the latest book by renowned scholar Professor Attilio Scienza. From the myths of ancient Greece to the language of modern wine communication, the book explores how storytelling shapes our understanding of wine, and why these stories matter more now than ever. Let's begin the journey.
Welcome to the Art of Wine Storytelling, the podcast where we explore the deep roots and evolving narratives of wine through the words of Professor Attilio Scienza. I'm your host, Ryan Robinson. Over the next 15 episodes, we'll trace the cultural, historical, and symbolic evolution of wine, not just how it's made, but how it's remembered, mythologized, and how it's sold. Professor Scienza is one of Italy's leading wine academics and storytellers. His book connects ancient myth with modern wine branding, showing us how storytelling has always shaped our understanding of the vine and the bottle. Today, we'll begin where all great stories begin, in the Mediterranean, among the gods, among the myths, and within the symbolic cradles of viticulture. This isn't just history, it's the foundation of how we communicate wine today, through origin, place, emotion, and meaning. Throughout the context of this podcast, we will be reading Professor Scienza's book, The Art of Wine Storytelling. Each episode, I'll read up to 3 chapters and then provide a commentary at the end, so you can stay on top of the book, as well as see those connections between the book and our modern wine industry today. Beginning with the book, we'll open with the foreword that was written by Stevie Kim. It's no accident that this book is being published to coincide with Professor Attilio Scienza's 80th birthday. A little tribute? Perhaps. A blatant excuse for another round of celebrations? Most definitely. Not that Scienza needs an excuse. He has more energy, dynamicism, and intellectual firepower than people half his age, which is frankly quite unfair. I can personally attest to how physically and mentally exhausting the wine world can be. Yet while many in his position might be enjoying a well-earned retirement, sipping a fine vintage in some sun-dappled vineyard, Scienza remains one of the hardest-working, most in-demand voices in Italian wine. The man is like a walking, talking, lecturing, and occasionally ranting encyclopedia, if cyclopedias had a penchant for Aristotelian digressions and Homeric analogies. And while he may not have a social media account, let's be clear. He never snubs it. In fact, I've personally volunteered him, on more than once, to participate in a TikTok trend dance. No problem whatsoever. This is a man who will fearlessly take on biodiversity, sedimentology, and yes, even the occasional viral challenge, reflecting his openness to everything, even when it's completely foreign to him. It's the same openness that keeps him not only relevant, but constantly evolving in an industry where tradition often resists change. So think of this book as a reciprocal birthday gift, his gift to us and our gift to him. Although, let's be honest, it's mostly his gift to us. Of course, Scienza's real gift isn't just his relentless work ethic, which is exhausting just to witness, but his storytelling. As listeners of Everybody Needs a Bit of Scienza, an Italian wine podcast series dedicated to Il Professore know, he can wax lyrical on subjects ranging from biodiversity and climate change to mythology, tectonics, and sedimentology. He'll casually drop insights that could take months to unravel, delivered in a way that suggests he's merely scratching the surface. And while it may seem like he's speaking off the cuff, don't be fooled. Every answer, every lecture, every unexpected tangent, and there are many, is rooted in a lifetime of study and an insatiable curiosity. I don't pretend I always follow everything he says. who does? But I can say that his enthusiasm is nothing short of contagious. And let's talk about that career choice. Scienza could have been a leading scientist in any number of fields, but in his infinite wisdom, he chose wine. And lucky for us, he did. His impact has been so profound that I often joke that if he spoke English, he'd be more famous than Jancis Robinson. But alas, he doesn't, which is precisely why we're publishing this book in a bilingual format, to give his ideas the wider audience they deserve. If you've ever seen him at Vin Italy, swarmed by admirers and juggling more events than seems human possible, with an itinerary that makes mine looks leisurely, and that's saying something, you'll understand just how revered he is. For those fluent in Italian, you get Scienza in his raw, unfiltered form, about as close to the horse's mouth as we dare to publish. But let's be honest, Scienza doesn't just speak or write in Italian, he speaks and writes in Scienza language. Yes, technically it's Italian, but it's Scienza's Italian. So much so that when we translate his books, it's often a two-step process. First, we translate from Scienza to Italian, then from Italian to English. Even his PowerPoint slides require a bit of deciphering before they can be shared with a broader audience. Thankfully, we have what we affectionately call Scienza whisperers on our team. People specially trained in untangling his uniquely complex phrasing. And for this book, Richard lent a hand in that delicate process. Because that's what makes Scienza's writing so, well, Scienza. It's colorful, it's unpredictable, it's occasionally maddening. It poses more questions than it answers. It scratches intellectual itches you didn't even know you had. It meanders, it provokes, and just when you think you're following along nicely, it takes an unexpected left turn into ancient philosophy or 19th century viticultural crises, which is precisely why it's so compelling. Perhaps it's time to brush up on your homework epics or visit your high school biology notes. But more importantly, it's time to rethink how we tell the story of wine, beyond the usual tired cliches. The working title for this book was Roots and Reason: The Evolution of Wine Storytelling. It was a title we were rather pleased with, a nod to both the deep historical roots of wine and the reasoning that helps us navigate its future. It also followed neatly from our last Scienza publication, Vine and Prejudice, Fake Science, and the Search for the Perfect Grape. But in the end, we went with The Art of Wine Storytelling, a title that, while perhaps less literary, has the advantage of being immediately clear to an Italian audience. It does, however, lack the rhetorical flourish of the Jane Austen-inspired alternative. Although, to be fair, while Austen may not have read Aristotle, Aristotelian concepts are all over her writing, just as they are in Scienza's work. From prehistoric cave paintings to the mythical voyages of Ulysses, wine has always been a central character in the human story. Scienza takes those ancient storytelling techniques, the heroes of Homer, the rhetoric of Aristotle, and applies them to more recent wine history, from the battle against phylloxera to the rise of the Super Tuscans. But more importantly, he shows us how these same techniques can be used by wineries today to tell their own stories in a way that resonates with modern consumers. And that is why we are, once again, delighted to share the insights, expertise, and boundless enthusiasm of this one-of-a-kind storyteller. Happy birthday, Professor Scienza. May you continue to inspire, provoke, and occasionally infuriate us for many years to come. Storytelling, the factory of stories. Lisa Crone, in her book Story or Die in 2021, argues that humans are not born to read, that reading is not a natural act, but that we are born to communicate and tell stories. Our brains synchronize with the protagonist of a story through the narrator, activating the areas responsible for processing emotions, allowing us to empathize and put ourselves in someone else's shoes. Storytelling, which originated almost simultaneously with humanity, has always been a critical tool for sharing social values. Its origins can be traced back to the first prehistoric cave paintings. While the great ancient narratives told universal myths that shaped human history, modern storytelling works in the opposite way. Instead of recounting past experiences, it describes reality through constructed tales, shaping emotions and creating narrative frameworks that allow people to connect with stories. From Marco Polo's travel diaries to the adventures of Robert Louis Stevenson. The concept of narration permeates every field of knowledge, from political science to anthropology, medical research to molecular biology, persuading, expanding, understanding, and sharing experiences. The so-called narrative turn in social sciences that took place in the mid-1990s coincided with the explosion of the internet and advances in information and communication technology. The words of the Israeli writer Nomi Eve define the essence of storytelling, where even modern stories can be understood through the lens of legend. The word legend comes from the Latin legere, which means to read. The word fiction comes from the Latin fingere, which means to form. From fingere, we also get the word fingers. We form things with our fingers. The word history comes from the Greek istor, which means to learn or to know. I believe in original etymology. I believe that fiction is formed truth. I believe that history is a way of knowing all of this. I believe that legend is how we read between the lines. This myth and imagination intertwine in Greek tradition, as wine becomes a medium of experience, echoing the voyages of Odysseus and the Greek settlers who brought viticulture to the West. The power of a story. Having a compelling story to tell is vital and strategic and has enormous potential for brand differentiation and recognition. The essential question is, what is the essence of the story to be told? Every convincing story originates from an inspired narrator. For wine producers, the mission must transcend mere profit to communicate a deeper purpose to their audience. Origins, aspirations, challenges, and successes form the foundation of each narrative. Defining your mission is the first step in crafting a story that resonates. But this requires technique. How do you distinguish between a generic mission, a formally correct one, and one that touches hearts and demands actions? Creating a meaningful narrative requires delving into the intrinsic significance of the wine's genesis and production, the effort that has gone into it and why it should be preferred, even desired. A wine's foundational identity lies in its story, not just in an eye-catching label. From here, the journey begins, setting out complex stories that touch the realities of our world. Philosophy or aesthetics are not enough to ennoble a wine. It is necessary to go in search of a deeper and more intrinsic understanding of its genesis and its production. Anyone who has dealt with science has had to deal with the theme of storytelling and that of Greek culture. Narration is a process inherent in our biological memory. These patterns are a short biographical propeller on which our narratives flow and are based on certain key elements. The hero in search of himself, the quest, the antagonist who opposes the hero, the conflict between the hero and the antagonist, the treasure, the event to be discovered to complete the quest, the adversity that the hero must overcome, the magical objects and the people who help the hero, the final prize on completion of the quest. Each of us feels a bit like a hero. Our daily lives reflect the hero's script, with each of us searching for some kind of treasure at the end. Homer, the father of Western storytelling, develops the theme of the hero who goes in search of himself, lives adventurous and dramatic experiences, is helped and returned to his native land, to his dearest loved ones. In summary, the storytelling of wine and its production should grab the attention of listeners, readers, and create new meanings. Fix related symbols and impressions in the imagination, provide a better understanding of the qualitative aspects of a wine, and provide context and relevance to the company. Effective storytelling creates empathy and increased user and product engagement, building a brand and logo loyalty. The role of the consumer. Consumers think, remember, and decide based on stories. Storytelling can be considered a factory of stories. As Julius Caesar noted in De Bello Gallico, men willingly believe what they wish to be true. Storytelling is a device for capturing attention by means of the story, the plot, and the narrative tension. It doesn't attract attention like the logo does, but it builds an audience loyalty thanks to its narrative flow. The human brain is better able to synthesize information when it is communicated in narrative form. From schemes, figures, and lists, stories are created using narrative techniques developed from fiction, comics, and cinema. The immaterial cues for a narrative are numerous: the territorial appeal, the socializing function, the identifying function, the projection of the self, the adherence to a lifestyle and consumption, the identity of the producer, the myth, and quality. The material cues are a little easier to interpret: the taste olfactory profile, the nutraceutical function, the healthiness, the sensory impact, the physiological impact, the psychological impact, the materialization of the packaging, the brand guarantee, the price. All these elements are on one hand the physical substance of a bottle, and on the other, the spirit of a bottle. It is difficult to build a story that resonates only through material elements. The story of a wine therefore starts from the story of the territory. The territory has history, anthropology, geography, soil, climate. These are all fundamental elements to tell a story because they provide a sense of place. We cannot invent a history of wine without being able to place it in a semblance of reality. Around this, we can build whatever we want. The most effective language is that of the senses. The territory can be explained not only as a physical description, but also in terms of how our senses interact with it and the impact it has. Of course, the starting point is the product. We cannot start from a territory without a quality product. The profile of the producer, the style of wine consumption, the genesis of the myth are also very important. And on the myth, we can build the story of the hero. No other product category has been able to develop its own poetics as refined, complex, and detailed as that of wine production. Enology is thus transformed into enolosophy, and wine can help to take us from a rationality that is too soberly humane to the elevated status of a sacred symbol. It is important, however, that entrepreneurs, wine communicators, those involved in retail sales, do not fall into the trap of the rhetorical component of the rich repertoire of the fairy tales that have contributed to creating and developing some nonconformist reflections about the possibility of adapting wine to the taste of consumers, especially those of tomorrow. We need serious communication, rich in technical content, made with simplified language, which leaves the consumer freedom to choose, and not just emotionally. A few guiding words are enough: landscape, territory, culture, and environment. Now that I've read those first opening chapters, let's unpack a few key ideas and connect them to the modern world of wine. First, Dionysus and Osiris. These mythological figures represent more than just divine winemaking. Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, madness, and ecstasy, reflects something we still see today, especially in the way natural wines are marketed. There's this romantic notion of wine as something wild, untamed, even mystical. That's straight from the mythos. When a bottle is described as alive or feral, we're echoing the cult of Dionysus. Shinza also points to the Noah story, the idea that wine was the first act of civilization after the flood. In a way, this mirrors how wine keeps rebounding after crisis. Think about the phylloxera of the 19th century, climate challenges, or even today, challenges of tariffs around the world. Each time we respond with innovation and rediscovery, whether it's planting new rootstocks, moving vineyards to higher elevation, rethinking irrigation, or even rethinking chains of trade. Wine survives, and that's part of the story. Then there's this dual symbolism of wine, both sacred and profane, joy and danger. It's something that still exists today in the way we talk about wine and health. Is red wine heart healthy or indulgent? Is it part of your lifestyle or does it become part of your vice? That duality thrives on in wellness branding, moderation messaging, and even alcohol-free alternatives. Finally, the Mediterranean is the first storytelling terroir. This idea of a place being infused with a story isn't ancient history. This is what today's DOCs, AOCs or AOPs, and even AVAs are all about. When we talk about a sense of place, we're continuing a practice that goes all the way back to Homer. So this book isn't just about wine origins, it's about how a wine's meaning has always been layered with memory, geography, and myth. What we take away from these first chapters is that storytelling, it's not a modern invention. It's baked into the DNA of wine itself. When a winery today puts a myth on a label or tells you the legend of a vineyard, they're following a tradition that goes back thousands of years. Myth was the original marketing tool. Modern winemakers use these ancient cues whether they realize it or not. Think of labels with Saturn, or amphora, Greek columns, lions, stars or moons. All these are symbols that we see on today's modern-day labels, but those symbols all harken back to Mediterranean origins myths. Even concepts like terroir, soil, slope, climate. These are often introduced to consumers through stories. The more compelling the narrative, the more memorable the wine. In the next episode, we'll leave mythology behind and we'll move into the earliest historical accounts of wine as a cultural and economic force. We'll explore how the Greeks, Etruscans, and Romans used wine not just as a drink, but as a way to build community, express status, and expand empire. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in episode 2.
You've been listening to The Art of Wine Storytelling by Professor Attilio Scienza, read and commented by Ryan Robinson. The book is available now on our site, Mama Jumbo Shrimp, and Amazon. Follow the Italian Wine Podcast on all the major platforms so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to rate and review us.